Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we continue our Fantasy Files series with a look at DeAndre Swift. If you did not catch the Friday edition of this podcast back on May 21st, you can actually hear from the Detroit Lions starting running back himself. He was kind enough to spare some time for us, had a good time discussing, if Swift was down to have a live Lion on the field, who he considers the all-swag RB1, and what he made of Anthony Lynn's comments about Jamaal Williams being the quote-unquote A-back and Swift being more the space back. So encourage you guys to check that out because, as much as I like to think I have a good grasp on what's going on in the NFL, obviously the players themselves are the ones in the locker room. So good stuff there. But yeah, and so this one we're going to focus more on Swift's fantasy football goodness. Now, I'm well aware that PFF, my lovely employer, who I thank very much for paying my bills, published a running back rankings article that was not in fantasy, deemed towards real life, that unfortunately left off Swift and Cam Akers. I don't agree with those rankings, and that's not the case here. So I'm sure that there's going to be some people quote tweeting this when it comes out, saying, oh, not even in the top 32. Let the record show that I'm vehemently against that ranking, and I firmly believe Swift is not just a top 32 back in the real life and fantasy, but I think much more in that top 20. And the biggest reason is because of his receiving ability. Now, go ahead, if you want, hold the week one drop against the Bears that should have won the game. If you want to just hold that against Swift for the rest of his career and refuse to say this guy is a great receiver because of that, go ahead. But where are we drawing the line, people? Like Julio Jones in week two let a perfect pass from Russell Gage bounce off his helmet in the end zone. Now, I know Julio's built up quite a bit longer career than Swift, but man, we can find examples of the best players in the league playing awful. Patrick Mahomes' dropped interception reel from last year is like 2-3 minutes long. I mean, it's like we just need to look at the entire product, and the entire product tells us that Swift was a great receiving back. Just in terms of yards per route run among all running backs with at least 25 targets last year, number 1 was Alvin Kamara, 2 James White, 3 Myles Gaskin, 4 Nyheim Hines, 5 Austin Eckler, number 6 DeAndre Swift. And, he stacks up favorably when we look at just rookies over the past 5 years as well. I mean, only Kamara, Eckler, Joe Mixon, Tariq Cohen, Miles Sanders managed to top Swift's gaudy per route efficiency. Like, he looks great on the field, both in terms of swag and just, his route running ability. I mean, one of the first, after Dan Campbell's, first press conference, lit everyone on fire talking about the biting kneecaps, but one of the first things he said after that was about Swift, his comfort in the slot and just his ability to kind of win out there. And we really saw that for stretches of the year, particularly in that Washington game. I mean, I know his breakout came against the Jaguars in week 6, but even then, that was just the Lions running so far over Jacksonville. I think AP was pretty close to 100 yards in that game too, and Swift just made the most out of his 14 carries. But for me, it was that Washington game that really kind of not woke me up. I was fully aware of Swift by that point, but made me think that this guy could be, more special than your usual running back with the workload. I mean, what he did in that game, 16 carries, 81 yards, but more impressively, caught all 5 of his targets for 68 yards and a score, with a lot of that coming lined up as a true receiver. Just get the ball in the guy's hands and he makes magic happen in space. So slippery, just the suddenness this guy cuts. You see it on film. He makes world-class professional NFL football players look slow at times, and it's unfortunate that right after that breakout game in week 10, we saw him hit the bench for the next 3 weeks. He returned later in the year and was still okay, but, at that point, we just didn't really see him have a chance to build on that momentum. He was able to play a season-high 73 snaps in that game. After he came back, he never reached 70 again, with nothing to really play for by that point in the season. There just wasn't really a need to kind of put this huge featured workload on his plate that we saw guys like Cam Akers, Jonathan Taylor, even, Antonio Gibson before his injury a little bit. We saw those guys kind of get those on playoff teams or teams. I think they were all playoff teams. Yeah. We saw those guys get those workloads because their teams were actively trying to win at the end of the year. Not that the Lions wanted to lose their final 4 games, but with Swift, they were certainly more willing to, just get him into the offseason somewhat healthy, and we can deal with the rest of it after. So truly, people, Swift, special as a receiver, as a rookie, and I mean, as great as kind of some of these advanced stats paint him out to be, I'm telling you, the film was every bit as impressive, if not more. The rushing issues is, I'm guessing, why he got kind of left off that aforementioned PFF top 32 running backs. Last year in PFF rushing grade, he ranked 38th among 47 qualified backs, just 30th in missed tackles forced per carry, 43rd in yards after contact per rush. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a bad rusher. This is kind of what we expected, though. I mean, coming out from our PFF draft guide, just what to kind of expect from him, are just main kind of one-sentence takeaway. Swift is a complete running back, but if you're valuing him highly, you better have a plan to take advantage of his receiving ability. That's the great part of his game, and that's fine. That's what we should be drafting running backs for in the year 2021. If you have an early down grinder, even Derrick Henry, man, as incredible as he was last year, there were portions of the games, them in comeback mode, where Darrington Evans is taking him off the field. Jeremy McNichols playing legit snaps over Derrick Henry. Now, whether or not those guys should have been doing that to begin with, maybe this is a bad example using Derrick Henry, but we don't want these early down type guys in the year 2021. So the fact that Swift, for now, is objectively a better receiver than rusher, that's good. He should be. And even then, again, I'm not willing to call him a bad rusher just yet, because 4.6 yards per carry behind the same offensive line. AP was at 3.9, Kerryon Johnson 3.5. And if you want to say, well, Swift faced less loaded boxes than AP or Kerryon because teams had to respect him as a receiver, one, you're right, and two, that's the point. That's why we shouldn't be as worried about the rushing ability, because Swift forces defenses to play him differently, because they know the second you load up in the box, if you put him out into the slot where he's comfortable performing, he's going to freaking undress whatever, just plotting linebacker you try to put on him in space. So to me, Swift, ideal modern day running back. Now the question is, will we have the ideal workload to kind of complement this ability? Because, this quote heard around the world from last week here in the middle of May, peak offseason coach speak season here, people. But from new offensive coordinator Anthony Lynn, former Chargers head coach, Bills offensive coordinator, running back coach before that. In regards to free agent addition Jamaal Williams, former Packers back, Lynn said the following: Jamaal is what I call a classic A-back. My A-backs are normally my bigger backs. I can leave those guys in there for all three downs. My B-back comes in. He's a guy that sometimes I want to use in space more. He's my speed and space guy, seemingly talking about DeAndre Swift. Let's just keep in mind, people, this interview was not like Lynn going over the entire offense and he just, chose to kind of talk about Jamaal. It was an article about Jamaal Williams coming into the picture, and they asked him about Swift, and he said, yeah, Swift's going to be there too. Just pick what coach off-season coach speak you want to pick, because people forget Lynn already called Swift a 3-down back in March. And the running back coach, Deuce Staley, throwback name from those early 2000s Eagles and Steelers teams even for a little bit. Deuce Staley noted Swift could be a 25 touch per game player, saying how, they can get him his 17, 18 rushes and then an additional 7 targets or so. So I get it. Those two headlines came before Lions gave Williams, his 2-year deal. Guys, it's a $6 million contract. As much as Lynn wants to call him their classic A-back, I know it's a new coaching staff and Swift was there last year, but you look at this offense and Swift is clearly the most explosive guy remaining. And I just think that, while we're not going to see Swift get this McCaffrey-esque 400 touch workload, I really hope these comments start leading to Swift falling down the board. If anything, it's going to be like it was in Green Bay, but we're not going to have the same kind of touchdown equity that Aaron Jones had over the years. But that's okay. I mean, as annoying as Jamaal Williams has been over the years, it's just been limiting Aaron Jones's potential to be the RB1, not his potential to be an RB1, because he was consistently. Even Aaron Jones, with Jamaal Williams being very good in his own right, over the past 2 years, Jones had 285 touches in 16 games in 2019, 248 touches in 14 games in 2020. So look, Jamaal Williams is good in his own right. When he got to start against the Texans, first play of the game, rips off a big run, has his helmet knocked off, he gets up and he's just more psyched than anyone. I love watching the dude play. Unfortunately, he keeps landing on these teams where he's stealing snaps from guys that we would hope to get the extra opportunities in their own right to be a better fantasy asset. So yeah, it's not ideal. I would rather, them not be hyping up the guy that we're hoping stays on the bench behind Swift. But I just think that in terms of the salary, in terms of the context of the interview, and in terms of what Lynn himself has said throughout the offseason, I still think we should, confidently project Swift as number one fantasy back. Will Jamaal have more carries than Swift? Maybe. AP had more carries than Swift last year, and it didn't really matter for fantasy land, man. We want those targets. That's what Swift brings to the table, and so what his coaching staffs have repeatedly called out. So Again, this is peak offseason coach speak season, people. Don't let one interview completely change your entire process on these guys. We got to keep it all in mind. I'm not saying to ignore it. There's a reason why I don't have Swift as a top 12 back or anything, even though that would be his ceiling with a legit workload. And you can laugh and say, I don't want anyone involved in the Lions offense. Like, look at James Robinson, the Jaguars last year. Like Swift, James Robinson is a good running back. I'm not trying to hate on him, but the reason why Robinson was RB1 son was because he had more touches than anybody other than Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook before he got hurt last year. Unfortunately, that is not really in Swift's range of outcomes. But then again, almost every backfield in the league at this point is a committee. At least we know the Lions committee is condensed around 2 backs. And God forbid something happens to Swift or Jamaal Williams, we know either of these guys can really handle themselves on all 3 downs. So moving ahead to our PFF Lily stat for DeAndre Swift, it's Anthony Lynn's recent history of just getting a PPR RB1. And it's happened consistently, just in terms of PPR points per game. In 2016, LaShawn McCoy was the RB4. In 2017, Melvin Gordon was the RB6. 2018, Melvin Gordon was the RB5. Even had Eckler turning in an RB27 production as the RB2. In 2019, that was when Gordon was holding out for a bit. Eckler finishes as the RB16. Gordon finishes as the RB15. Then even last year, even with Eckler missing, 6 games and even being really banged up in that one, I believe he got hurt against Tampa, like 6 snaps into the game or something ridiculous. He was still the RB12 in points per game because receptions are a freaking cheat code in fantasy football. Lynn knows how to get his RB1 those receptions. So with all that said, DeAndre Swift enters 2021 as my RB16. It's right in line with his underdog ADP. I will take him ahead of guys like Chris Carson, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders for the pass game upside. I would take guys like Cam Akers, Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Antonio Gibson, Najee Harris, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire before Swift. While Swift has that receiving workload, I think it's pretty clear at this point that, more than 200 carries, that's probably, a little bit of a pipe dream. So unfortunately, again, I don't think Swift's going to have a big enough role to really leap into RB1 territory. I don't think the Lions offense is going to be good enough to kind of help him offset any lack of opportunity with touchdowns. But man, we're still looking at a very talented back that might all of a sudden be going really under the radar. The amount of people freaking out about that Lynn quote right now as the RB16, I think Swift's someone you don't need to come away with drafts, and I don't need to use a 3rd round pick on, or even God forbid a late 2nd round pick. We don't need to use that on a guy in a questionable offense whose workload is a little bit up in the air. The second Swift starts falling down, though, that's when he's going to become a priority, people. Once we see that ADP creeping behind J.K. Dobbins, behind Miles Sanders, starting to get in that RB20 range, that's when we pounce on DeAndre Swift. So, hey, I get it. I would rather Anthony Lynn, had told us that Swift's going to be the man and we could really just start centering lineups around him right now. He might have done us a favor, though, when things are all said and done, if the community overreacts to it like they appear to be doing right now. So 2021, I think it's going to be RB2 season for DeAndre Swift. He's the only guy other than TJ Hawkinson, this Lions offense, I think you need to really prioritize. And hey, both Swift and Williams can be decent values with where they're going. Like Swift, Williams is, a competent 3-down back who's going to offer borderline RB1, if not that already upside if Swift happens to go down. Again, people, we're just chasing volume here. We're not chasing talent as much. Luckily, Swift might be in a situation to have a good amount of both, even if Jamaal is a little bit more annoyingly involved than we would all hope. Last point, if you want to try to attack this Lions backfield or make some money on it, because why wouldn't you, go ahead and do so over at Underdog Fantasy. If you like fantasy football and if you like playing fantasy for money, you need to check out Underdog Fantasy. Underdog's got everything, including season-long and playoff best ball. Best ball is a season-long game where you draft a team like you normally do, but that's it. There's no in-season roster management. Underdog automatically selects your best performers each week, saving you loads of time. So go to Underdog Fantasy and deposit $10 using promo code PFF and get a free PFF Edge annual subscription. That's promo code PFF. Draft now at Underdog Fantasy. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. New episodes every single day. Fantasy Files also have regular Wednesday episodes with my guy Andrew Erickson. We go over, news from the previous week, more kind of big picture ideas, and of course a Friday podcast, I should say, 10 questions with hopefully more and more NFL players. We've gotten T. Higgins, we've gotten DeAndre Swift so far, trying my hardest to continue to keep those podcasts up with the good people. So thank you as always for tuning in. I'm Ian Hartitz, and until next time, take care, everybody.